You know, it's a changing world, and one of the things that help us understand the changing world is research. And so as churches have been struggling and families may be disconnected and sometimes drifting away from the church, we're kind of dealing with some of the questions of where do we go from here? And the Communio nationwide survey on faith and relationships really kind of points to the family decline and how it relates to faith decline in the United States. Actually, the survey has 3 key issues that are impacting our society today. Go to communio.org/study to download the nationwide study on faith and relationships.
The Eric Geiger Leadership Podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network, which is dedicated to resourcing leaders to face the complexities of ministry. The Church Leaders Podcast Network supports pastors and ministry leaders by challenging assumptions, providing insights, and offering practical steps that will help them navigate a variety of cultures and contexts. Learn more at ChurchLeaders.com/podcast network.
This month, 40 years ago, Lori and I were hired by Mariners Church. That whole journey, both Lori and I have the lifestyle of listening to God. And ever since we've been that, every summer we get away for a break and we pray 2 prayers. I spend time in God's Word saying, God, what is it that you want me to teach your church this next year? And so I kind of plan what I'm going to teach for the next year. And the second prayer that Lori and I pray is, God, are we where you want us to be, doing what you want us to do? And every year we hold our hands and just say, God, are we where you want us to be, doing what you want us to do? But this summer, we did the same thing. We got away and prayed about what God wanted us to teach, but then we also prayed this prayer, God, are we where you want us to be, doing what you want us to do? And God answered it in a different way than he ever did before. God said this to us. He said, it's time to begin the transition. It's time.
So glad you're with us today. September 2018, I became the senior pastor of Mariners Church. Sitting next to me is the pastor emeritus, the predecessor, or my predecessor, senior pastor at Mariners Church for 35 years. I began September 2018 as senior pastor. In January 2018, Kenton stood in front of Mariners Church and announced that he was going to be transitioning from being the senior pastor, that a search team from within the church had been assembled under the direction of the elders, and that this search team was going to begin searching for the next senior pastor of Mariners Church. That search team then worked with a search firm, the Vanderbloemen Search Group, and that began a long process. We'll talk in subsequent episodes about that, but I was first contacted in February, just a month after the announcement was made. But what I want to talk about today is what happened in terms of preparing the church before the moment of January 2018, and then how did Kenton think about the moment of 2018. So think about 35 years as senior pastor, standing in front of a church saying, I am announcing not my retirement. You didn't like the word retirement. I watched the video so many times when I was contacted. You said, here's what I'm going to be doing next, because you had spent years preparing your heart for what you would do next, that you were going to invest in our global family, that you were going to train senior pastors, and that you were still going to teach God's word. Those are the 3 things. Am I remembering correctly?
And my family. Be with my family.
And be with your family. I don't want to forget your family.
No, can't do it.
And be with your family more. And so you knew exactly what you were going to do, but still standing in front of the church, 35 years senior pastor announcing that transition. How did you prepare staff and key leaders? Take us back maybe 3 years, but then also 3 months before that moment.
So for 3 years, every year I would rehearse the crisis plan. I did a If I Die talk, which became funny to the staff and less funny to the board.
Who all heard the If I Die talk?
Everybody on staff.
The whole staff?
Whole staff, and everyone all the people on the directional board, the board that
The directional elders.
directional elders. So with the elders, with the staff, I would go, it was funny and it's always painful because people don't know how to respond to it. But what I would say is every summer I go with my family, I could die. And if I die, here's the crisis plan. And what I would do is I would call out the teaching plan for the next year, who was doing it. I would call out what their responsibility was. And it was just simple. You guys, your job is to move your ministry forward and move the mission of this church forward and love the people. No one's going to talk to you about your opinions. No one's going to ask you your opinions. None of you will be involved in the transition. If any of you try to insert yourself, you will lose your job. So clarity on who was in charge of Sunday morning and the teaching. And so we had a name, they could see it. We had a teaching team, what percentage they would teach in the last 3 years specifically, how much they would teach, but also we would bring in more outsiders than what we were used to, only just to introduce outside voices.
Okay.
So there was clarity in that. Who would run the staff, how it would be run. So the goal of it is every staff person would be absolutely clear, absolutely comfortable, as comfortable as they could be with the sense of,
Yeah, I mean, you don't want them too comfortable. Be excited about you dying.
No. But with the sense of, okay, we have a job. And they knew what their job was, that they had to carry the ministry, love the people, and they moved the mission forward. There was no, you don't get to just take a year off. We're going to keep pressing forward. And that the elders would trust them to run the church for a year, but their job was they would take the job of finding the next senior pastor, and nobody would ask you. Now, another thing I did at about when I thought it was 3 years out, I started, and in my day, senior pastors spoke around where I was around 90% to 100%. So that's kind of what I did of the weekends. But I had evolved probably 3 years out to 80, 75%. I still was doing more than I should. But what I consciously did is I went down to 60% so that the church would get used to multiple voices. It wouldn't be so dependent upon me.
How many years out did you do that?
Probably 3 years out.
And when you did that, did people, was there a knee-jerk reaction at all?
No, and it was so disappointing and hurtful. and hurtful really on two ways. One, I was an idiot.
Because that's a big,
I was an idiot.
To make such a quick move from 80 to 60 is a big shift.
But you know what? The church did great. It let younger voices step in.
Great.
It was better for me. It was more manageable. I think that in my own personal life, I would have been better had I gone down to a lower percentage, wherever it is. I don't know if but I was insane. Okay. So one is I got to see my own insanity. Yeah. And then two, really the church was more healthy for it. So it was
that's great.
It was a lesson.
So
that was valuable.
What about 3 months out? So say October of 2008. No, this would be of 17.
So one more thing on the 3 years. I took a sabbatical. It was only 4 months, but it was super valuable. And we can talk about that later, but that was the really helping me of letting go of the identity and letting go of the mission. And it really forced the staff to look and say, if we had 4 months and Kenton wasn't around, would we do well? And they did well. The church moved forward. Things moved forward. It was different than what anybody anticipated, but it was super valuable. And it was an experiment on saying, okay, Kenton's not going to just be gone for a month. He's going to be gone for 4 months. What happens? That absolutely was a very valuable.
That's great.
And so it's not, pastors think, oh, I should have a sabbatical. I never did a sabbatical until 34 years, three years. But it was more valuable for the church. I don't know if you need it every 7 years, but it was valuable for the team, valuable for the church. So that was 3 years out.
Oh, that's great.
Great lessons to learn out of that.
So 3 years out, everyone's annually hearing If I Die talk. You're reducing your teaching. You're taking a long, when I say long sabbatical, I'm saying in terms of different from your month-long study break.
In the summer, different.
You're taking a 4 month.
Because the church it could hold its breath for 4 weeks. It couldn't hold it for 4 months. They had to literally make decisions, do things when Kenton wasn't around.
That's good. All right, so now take us 3 months out.
So 3 months out, what I did is one of the things that I determined that I wanted to give to the senior pastor was 250 couples that were absolutely committed to the church. So to you, what I wanted to give is 250 people that said, I'm committed to this church. I'm committed to the vision of this church. I will stay even if I don't like the new guy and my kids want to leave. I'm going to stay for 3 years and I'm going to give. And so that was part of, coming out of, those are the shepherding elders. And it came out of the crisis plan and saying, I've got to have a bigger group of people that are trained in the doctrine, the DNA, the beliefs, and all of those things. What I did is I met with all 500 of those people. And I met with them in breakfasts. They came 50 a shot, 100, as many as I could get.
And this is in the fall before?
Just before we were going to announcement and on the other side. So what you will hear, what's going to happen.
Yep.
And the idea was to saying to them, you are key people. You've made a huge commitment to me. Now I'm asking you to make a commitment to the church that's beyond me. And this is the same thing that ultimately the staff heard and the church heard. We're going to begin a search process. It's time. So in making the decision and communicating it, what I found out is it was people really locked onto the statement of it's time. And then the 3-4 things that I said on the other side had to sing. And so I said, it's time because Lori really wants to spend more time with grandkids. I have 11 grandkids. It's time. We're going to spend more time with them. Lots of people got that in spades. Secondly, I said it's time because it's time for me to invest in pastors.
That's good.
And so I was super committed to that. And they believe that. And they go, yeah, Kenton, because I had spent the time to do it. They believe that. And then those other things that you mentioned. So that statement had to ring true.
This is really good. This is helpful. So the meetings you were having before you tell the whole church, those meetings actually helped you form the language because you were watching what resonates. Right. You were basically testing what you were saying.
Started with the elders. So I came back. So, literally Lori and I said, it's time in June. I came back to the elders and I watched them and it's like, what did they do? And it isn't until I could really, it's time. And they're looking, wait, you go. No, it's time because Lori's going to leave me unless I go to spend time with the grandkids.
You had some punchy visionary statements connected to the banner statement of it's time.
Right. It's time.
But the lesson I would want to take away, I would want a leader to take away from this is the pre-meetings before the announcement, they actually helped you find the language.
Good. Yeah, that's right.
It helped you be able, because when you're in front of the whole church in January of 2018, you didn't wing that moment.
No.
There was a lot of preparation, not only for your heart, but also even testing the words that would be used so that the people understood what the direction was.
So, and only took 10 minutes, but it's like, it's time, key statements, saying, here's what you can expect. So of all these key stakeholders, none of you will be involved in the process. You will never get to see a candidate. There will not be 3 candidates that show up to the church and a speak off. That's not going to happen.
So you're
and there's not going to be a vote.
You're announcing that same weekend.
I did it to the church, but I did it to the shareholders beforehand.
Yes.
Same thing.
But this is big. On the same weekend of you announcing your transition, you also are announcing the plan for how a new leader is going to be identified.
Yeah, certain key components of it, right.
But the key parts of you're not voting, there's a search team.
Right, which seems un-American because they're like, wait, and you won't get to see, and the people that you see speaking, and the big overarching line is you absolutely will not know anybody we're looking at.
And what's some language you used there? Didn't you use like arranged marriage or something kind of?
I did. And I said, first of all, it should make sense to you that you will never know. There's a search team, they'll look, I won't know, no one will know, and here's why. These people have jobs, they're in churches, they're working somewhere, and for them to say to their church, I'm looking at Mariners, would cause them to lose their job. So you will never know who we're looking at because these people would lose their jobs if you were to know. So there's no possible way. And if you knew, it means somebody on our team violated a sacred trust that they've been given. So in a very few words, people got, yeah, that's probably true. I will never know. And there's not going to be 3, and we're not going to vote. So
you set up that we're not running a bunch of preachers in front of you.
We will decide, and so the search team will look. So they've been trained. Then Lori and I will spend significant time, and the elders will make the final decision. And then I used the idea of it's arranged marriage. And I said, you know what? Arranged marriages work for hundreds and hundreds of years. And this person, they're going to come in and you'll love them. And so you do the presumptive close. And so with all of the 250 stakeholders, what I think they valued was they looked at me and they said, okay, it's really time and there's no talking Kent and Lori out of it too. Okay, I don't have a voice in this. I get no voice. Kenton's expecting me to give money and give commitment, and I have no voice. And that I get the opportunity to pray for this and then support it on the other end. Because in our structure, I'm not saying that should be everybody's structure, but in the way we did it, it was just honesty, clarity, and say, this is the way we're going to move forward with it. And that's not for everybody.
But it's honoring to be honest.
That's right.
It's really kind to be clear about here's what the process is going to be. Right. Okay, that's the church as a whole. And
then did the same thing to the church. So everything I did to that 250,
shared.
I did to the staff. Yep. So to the staff, and again, same thing. Your job is to move your ministry forward, love our people, move the mission of the church forward. You will never know who we're looking at. The committee is known, but if any of you try to get at the committee, you're going to lose your job. Okay. Don't come close to it. And, you do your job and we're going to go at it. And literally what I said is searches, I just would say to people, our search went faster than what most people thought. We announced it in January. You said yes in July. Yeah. We said it might take a year and a half. So we created an expectation that 18 months wasn't a problem.
That's good.
And so we'd move forward. Yeah.
So January 18, you announce next weekend at church. Was it like a normal weekend?
Well, yeah, because what we said, because you listen to it, in addition to it, what we said is, the message I gave was talking about hearing God's voice. So it was the illustration. It wasn't even an announcement. Okay. It was an illustration in the message. Here's what it means to hear God's voice. Okay, scripture. This is how Lori and Kenton heard God's voice. Okay. It's our time, so it just moved into that. This is what it means for you as a church. We're going to go through a season. We're going to be looking. None of you will know. We won't talk about it on the weekends. The whole purpose of the weekends is for Jesus. Amen. You will continue to get Jesus. We're going to worship. We won't talk about it. Now, it comes from a deep-seated value of show, not tell. So almost everything that we do is like, you know what? If you're telling, it's because you haven't shown. And so for me, what I've always said to the church is, I'm going to show you. I'm not going to tell you. So we're going to love you. We're going to take care of you. We're going to show you all this work. And then you know what? We're not going to tell you. And if we have to tell you, it's because we're not doing a good job showing. So, we basically showed them. We didn't talk about it the next weekend. We never talked about it.
And then Jesus continued to be the hero in the center of the services.
That's right, every time. So that was it. People came out, and we didn't write about it. It was on the website. It frequently asked questions. We didn't highlight it. I didn't talk about it because I wasn't involved in it, which was a decision that I made in preparing myself, because I couldn't have been involved in it. I'm not good at that. I couldn't have managed it. Those are all things that are just true about me. So since I couldn't manage it, I wouldn't be good at it, I was out of it. So literally, it wasn't hard for me to not even think about it. I was around a staff that wasn't thinking about it. I was aware of people I hugely trusted and had trained so that I knew they absolutely understood the church.
And I want to talk about that.
Okay.
So we've talked about the announcement in January, and then boom, church continues to go forward. The search team. So there's Mariners Church is led by a team of elders, directional elders. Senior pastor is one of those directional elders. The directional elders then appointed a search team from within the church. You then gave...
much more I chose them.
You chose a search team?
Yeah.
So the elders didn't? Mm-mm. You chose a search team.
And it really was me and the ex-chairman, who I super trusted.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that I could let go of it is because the chairman, the past chairman of the board, I absolutely trusted. And he's brilliant, and he's a great interviewer, great chooser of people.
Totally.
And then he and I sat down, and I said, we ask elders for names, but really they didn't give us good names or didn't even give us names. And so what he and I sat down with him and I said, you need to come up with a list and we're going to pray over it.
So
I will
you and
pray
Lido
and fast.
together
We
chose
prayed
it.
and fasted and we chose it.
great.
Then what I did is I sat down and I trained them.
That's what I want to hear. So what tools did you give that team?
Same thing I did in the crisis. Everything that came out of that crisis plan. So it was, what are the doctrinal statements? First, what's our theology? What are our deep doctrinal beliefs? So we went through that. What is our strategy? What is our mission, vision, values? What is our story? So we told the story of Mariners Church. So our unique story, DNA, vision, mission, values, doctrinal beliefs, unique things about our church that are unique about our church, how we approach missions and outreach, whether it is unique, we thought it was unique. So here are unique things about us. What do, positions that we took, that we talked to you about, where we stand in women's role in the church, women's ministry. I mean, all sorts of things that would be critical in the interviewing process that we said, we need somebody that stands here. And then in addition to it, subtle things like, so do we want a teacher who's a great leader? Do we want a leader who's a great teacher? Do we want a shepherding pastor? Do we want, there's all sorts of people you can do. So we talked a lot about where we were on all of those spectrums so that they didn't have to, they never had to decide for themselves.
And I want to just double click this for a moment because it's really helpful. And I think you and I would be on the same page that there's not right and wrong answers on that as much as it's a church knowing who they are.
Exactly.
Right? So the church has got to know who they are, which is why you were training the team. And you'd already developed the tools from the emergency plan, and you've been leading the elders through this thinking before. Right. So let's give some leaders some buckets of how they can think about their church, right? So you mentioned theology, right? So a theology would be a big bucket.
Huge bucket.
Philosophy of ministry.
Huge bucket.
And maybe a way to ask that.
And it's your identity, who you are.
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
I would say philosophy of ministry would be, how do we think about weekend gatherings? What's the point of a weekend gathering? Is it only to equip believers? Is it to only attract non-believers? Is it 80% equip believers, 20%?
Exactly. And literally you had those discussions because it goes, but when you put it on a scale, everybody, you go, here's the scale. Where are we? They all nailed it. And you go, that's right. And then we would identify, what does it look like to be here? Yeah. Speaking, we speak to felt needs a certain amount, but then we do book studies. We do. So that literally they go, this is what we want somebody to say when we interview them, is to say something like that as a template. So
we got the theology bucket, and I'd say the philosophy bucket. You just are thinking, as you're working on this document, what are the most important things in our church, and the thinking beneath those things? Right. How do we think about weekends? How do we think about groups? How do we think about outreach or missions? That would be philosophy. Yeah,
another one that was a big one is, we wanted somebody that would say evangelism has to be first among equals. So it was actually a statement that we said. They don't have to say that statement, but if we had somebody that's just going to go, no, I'm real balanced and I want to do that, because evangelism's so hard for an equipping church, a discipling church. So we say, we want somebody who's really, no, I'm going to reach the lost. I want to, so that That's when great. We interviewed, it had to be first among equals, evangelism.
And then another bucket I would say is values.
Yes.
Because you can have people who have the same philosophy. For example, maybe a church's philosophy that, hey, the weekend is for the believer, but we want to be comprehensible or understandable for unchurched people or non-believers. You can have two churches with that same exact philosophy of the weekend, but very different values in how they operate. Values on level of excellence or authenticity, and they're all those are good things, but the stated, this is who we are, values are important. And I also think, Kenton, even thinking succession really helps leaders understand who they are, get this down on paper. So
that's right.
Even thinking succession is going to help you be a better leader now, because it's forcing you to think through, who are we really?
And you stop pretending like you can be everything. You start to go, you know what, God's got, what I love is in our area, we have great churches. We just have to be who God's called us to be, and let them be all those other things. So you got to have values, and then some of the things that are just unique to you. I think Understanding another bucket that you didn't hit is your story. The story of your church is important, but then the story of our community. So our community, our church is filled with leaders. They're people who lead in industry. They lead in communities. They're well educated. They're people who want to be the decision makers. They're making lots of money, and so that's just our community in many ways. Now, at the same time, right next to it is we have the most impacted neighborhood west of the Mississippi. And terrible poverty. So it's not like we're just one or the other. And so it's like that's who we are. So what is a person going to look like that can speak to this and speak to that at the same time and not just be blind one to the other? This is who we are. This is our community.
Right.
So you have to have a community bucket of who we are.
Totally.
Somebody fits in the community. You have to have what's our story, our unique story and those things.
Let's double click the community bucket for a moment, because as you're thinking about the church, are you thinking the community as she currently is, or are you looking at demographics for what the community is going to be like in 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah. It's who we are today and what we will be.
Yeah.
So for us, our community was changing. One of the really big, long discussions we had with the search committee is, do we go with somebody of a different ethnicity?
Right.
Do we target it?
Yeah.
Or do we just say, God, what will you bring? And so we had a long discussion about that. And we said, we're going to be open to whatever God brings. But the next person probably won't have that because of the change in the community. Probably, it's not my decision, but, you'd have to start to think much more broadly because of what's happening in the ethnicity in the communities that we're around. So, we talked about that.
That's good. Those are really helpful buckets that actually impact how you lead today. Great tools then for the search team. Okay.
And so then I had total trust in him. So that's why to the staff, to myself, I never had to look over my shoulder or wonder. I had absolute trust in the chairman of that committee, what they were doing and how they were moving forward.
So January 2018, you're announcing. Does the search team at this point already know they're together?
Oh, yeah. The search team we had been praying through October. They were formalized in November.
So really, the January 2018 was the pinnacle, not the beginning of the process.
Yeah, no, everything was going, and we had to say it because people would find out because we had hired, had hired and we had done stuff. We were moving.
But I think
hired a search firm.
Yeah, I think that's different though than how some church leaders will think. Right. Some church leaders will think I'm going to make the announcement and then put everything in place. The announcement was the final step in that process. Right. It wasn't the first step.
Right. And, the church, the expectation, you won't know anything and you won't hear anything. And the church, the way we prepared the church is we assumed we're going to find a great person. When we find him, we're going to introduce him to you. We are moving forward and charging ahead, and we are good to go. And we're not waiting for anything. We are moving today. And if it takes us a year and a half, if it's tomorrow, it doesn't matter. We're moving ahead.
Why is it important, you think, to do it that way? To when you made the announcement, to know what the process was, as opposed to make the announcement and then say, hey, we're going to get back to you with more information about what the next steps are. Because when the announcement was made, there was absolute firm clarity. Right. Why is that important to not make the announcement until there's clarity about how this process is going to go?
Well, one is because you're asking people to give and trust you with money, time, talents. And if you aren't clear, it's a really big thing to ask to give money when you're not clear, especially in a transition, because they're saying, do you guys know what you're doing? Do you have a plan here? Yeah. Most people will support a plan if it's there. But if you don't have one and you're making it up as you go, it's a lot to ask for people in a church. Secondly, there's always a group of people that are looking to be a wedge to see if there's weakness, and they want to create, I don't know what it is, but disunity is the Achilles heel.
Every letter but Philippians.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the point would be, we didn't want any wedge. One of the biggest things we talked about is the spiritual battles, and we had a whole prayer team and all that. But we understood the spiritual battles would always be somebody trying to wedge in. And so we didn't want any wedge points that we could avoid and say, we're just going to state. If they don't like it, at least we're clear. And there wasn't any dialogue. And it's not like, oh, there's no town meetings. There's no, hey, come and tell us how you feel about it. This is, for us, this is what fit into who we were, the way that it's just a natural part of the way that we're governed. Most people don't even know that we're an elder-led church. And so all of a sudden when you introduce it and they don't get to vote or anything, they're like, I didn't know that about us. But you just say that's the way we're run. So you get to articulate who you are as you're going at it, but you don't have wedge points for disunity.
Well, I'll say something from on the other side of the equation, which is the person who's coming into the role. I first heard about the possibility of coming to Mariners in February, so probably 6 weeks after the announcement was made. So obviously I spend hours on the church website. I watched your sermon from January. I looked at all the documents that were there. I looked at a video that had the chairman of the search team and the chairman of the elder board. It was Guido and Keith Keller, and they were announcing the process. And I was attracted to the clarity. So I thought, wow, this is a group who has really thought through. And to me, that gave an indication that this was an intentional, thoughtful church who they weren't winging this process. So I asked you about why it was important to the church, but you're hearing me say it was actually important for me as a candidate, as someone who was being considered for the role, to see it was an impressive display of humility on your part. It showed there was a ton of buy-in, that there was a lot of people who had been involved, that there was a lot of thoughtfulness in prayer. And then, I found out from all the preparation that you had done with the search team, I could tell, and we'll talk about this next time, via all of the interviews and all of the conversations that we had, that they had spent significant time investing in this process of searching for a new leader, that this was not something that they were taking lightly, that when they told me they were praying and fasting for this process, I believed them because I saw all the work that had been done. So it immediately gave a sense of holiness and reverence and awe over the whole process. Like, this is sacred what we are doing. I've been invited into a sacred process. So that's one reason I think it's important to when you announce to know where you're going, because you have done the hard work and you've prepared people and you've prayed things through.
And then we showed them, because literally I think everybody showed up and said, well, what's going to happen this week? What's going to happen this week? And what happened this week is exactly what happened last week and the week before. And so, and people are like, wow, Kenton's not, he's not falling apart. Things aren't, and I'm not going anywhere. Everything's going to, and so everything stayed the same. And for people in the church who, they're going through business struggles, family struggles, struggles with their kids. All they want is Jesus. That's and right. They keep getting that. They're going, okay, I can trust this church.
Yeah, my church is moving forward.
That's right. And this transition isn't going to mess my life up. That's all they want to know.
Well, thanks for joining us today on the Eric Geiger Leadership Podcast. Next session, we're going to be talking about the search and the fit for a new leader.
If you listen to the podcast, you know that I love research. I used to lead a research company. So I love when research helps to illustrate a question we have. And one of the questions a lot of people are having is, how do we look to the decline of the family, maybe the relationship around fatherhood and issues of faith and church? Well, again, the Communio nationwide study on faith and relationships actually points to the collapse of marriage, where resident fatherhood fits into that, and how they all point ultimately to a relationship to Christianity and decline in the church. So visit communio.org/study to download Communio's nationwide study on faith and relationships.